Good morning, Matt Mullican. Thank you for being with us. We are very pleased to welcome you to this online conference on the circulation of images. I'm Béatrice Joyeux-Prunel. I'm a professor in digital humanities and art historian of contemporary art at the University of Geneva in Switzerland.
And I'm in Brussels, so.
And you're in Brussels, yes.
Thank you for giving us this interview.
I was born in 1951 in Santa Monica, California. Both my parents, my mother is still alive at the age of 99 as an artist, quite well known at this point. And my father was a painter throughout until he died about 20 years ago. He died, my father. So I grew up in a house of artists. I traveled as a child. I lived in Venezuela. My mother is Venezuelan. My father is from the Midwest, from Oklahoma. And I lived as a child, I lived in New York City. I lived in Rome, Italy. And I lived in Caracas, Venezuela, and in Santiago, Chile. And then I went to I graduated high school and went to California Institute of the Arts, where I studied with John Baldessari. And my class with John had a lot of, Jack Goldstein was there, David Salle was there, Barbara Bloom was there, Jim was there. It was a good group of people, many others as well that you would not know. And then I moved to New York, and first chance I got, I went to Europe. I went to Geneva for an exhibition that Germano Celant did called American-Venezuelan. This was in, I think, 80 or 81. John really said to us, John Baldessari said, leave LA, move to New York, and then work in Europe. I mean, this is what he demonstrated, and this is what I did. The group that I grew up with, and I say the group is really the artists that I hung out with in school and then after school, have been now, have been identified as the Pictures Generation group. And the most famous, of course, is Cindy Sherman, and then Richard Prince is a part of that, and many, 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 many other artists. And I was talking with my gallerist, one of my gallerists, Capitan, Gisela Capitan, and I said to her that I was a pictures generation artist. I was a pictures artist, and she looked me straight in the face and said, "No, you're not. You're not one. You're not. Your concerns are not of them. You're a different kind of an artist." And but when you think about it, my work, I use the word pictures in my work, have been using it pretty consistently back 50 years. I started working in 1973 with those words. And so that's, like entering the picture, for instance, and all of that whole subjective thing. I mean, really, my generation comes out after conceptual art, and we all knew conceptual artists very, very clearly at CalArts, because we were following them, and John would bring them to us. So we met a lot of them, and someone like Lawrence Weiner, who basically said that the artwork does not have to be physically produced. The artwork can be written down or spoken or anything. So the object itself was now was secondary, but it was still about the form of the representation that seemed to be very important. And so I come along, my group of my friends, and what do we have to do? Because reductivism, modernist reductivism, had ended totally at that point. It was perfect. The art was perfect, and we were the next generation. So what do? How do you follow perfection with a big red bow on it? I mean, it was perfect. Everything was done. And so my feeling was to do something that was not logical and was not about the form, in its center. That's the major difference between John and I, is that his work has to do with extending the language of painting and of art, and mine is not necessarily to do that. What I wanted to do was to enter the picture and to prove that stick figures live lives, to go into the animated image and to say, yes, that is a real place. And then to demonstrate that reality, to go into that reality, which eventually leads to my investigation within virtual reality.
Matt, and I remember, I don't know, I thought about that the other day when I was preparing this talk, and I remember a long time ago, at the beginning of the 90s, I went actually with Michael Tarantino. He drove me there to Tourcoing, to the prefiguration of the Fresnois. And I remember the building was very in a bad state. It was raining inside. And in a very constructing impression, you presented a room with virtual glasses.
Yes.
And with those glasses, we could enter and travel in different spaces that you created, and it worked. But actually, this technique became used for this cutting-edge technology at that time became a very common technology today, and they're using for video games. But I haven't seen so many of your exhibition, but actually you completely, you're not working with this technology anymore. And actually, many of the work in your exhibition at the Max, you're using the
rubbing.
The rubbing, thank you. You're using, which is a very old old mechanical way to reproduce the images. So maybe, can you say how you go from one
form to another?
Yes, yeah.
They cohabit the space that they're in, and they relate to it. I mean, with the virtual reality, I'm still doing virtual pieces. You know, I may not, you know, I showed them, there was only one place in the exhibition inside the MIT project where I did have the computer, that computer image, you know, the virtual space. And it's about, and also it has to do with entering the picture. That was back in Tourcoing, that was with VPL equipment, and VPL was started by Jaron Lanier, and Jaron Lanier was the person who coined the phrase virtual reality. That was his term. And this was his equipment that I used. And then, you know, I would show that in an exhibition next to myself under hypnosis, putting myself into a trance state, and then showing that in a video next to the virtual video, because they're the same thing. It's a matter of going into, you know, an imaginary context. And then the form creates that context. If you were to say that hypnosis could be considered a form. The thing about the rubbings is that they are the first form of reproducible media. They go back centuries to China, and where you'd have one master, the model, and then you could rub images from that model and then take them home. It was like a newspaper. It was about spreading information. And I like having the youngest, the newest media form in the same context with the oldest. They function well together. And I want this tension, but the tension is in the forms. In my work, I've gone from stained glass windows to video projections, to cast iron, to ceramics, to, you know, the point is that the form itself has meaning, and of course contextualizes the information that you're getting. A flag representing a sign will represent it in a very different way than a watercolor or a virtual or even a carpet.
Is there a difference for you between a picture and an image?
I would say that images become pictures. I don't know, and pictures are of course images, but there is a difference. I think the difference has to do with the engagement of what you're looking at. And that engagement is, in a way, the story of where you are and what you're seeing. What you're seeing is one thing, but where you are is another. And we are seeing an image, but we are in a picture. It just has to do with the psyche of the place. It's like what I call that world is a picture. It's not, the image is the real world, and that world is the picture of that image. I mean, that's just a very simplistic way of separating those two concepts. I have been using the word picture a lot more than the word image. And I continue, although there is a place in my work for images as well as pictures. The elements are very important. Elements, what my eye sees. Does my eye see? For one thing, my eye does not see. I see, but my eye does not see. And my eye decodes patterns that become images, that become pictures.
And my question was, is it for you a way to make order from chaos, to stop images from circulating?
You know, I would not call it chaos. We are, you know, like animals, we are animals, and we live our lives, and we're fine that way. I'm watching squirrels in the backyard here now, because I'm facing our backyard, and there's squirrels running around. And they seem to be making decisions about where they go, and there's no there's no chaos. They are in their world and they're fine. And generally we are like that. But when we start to change those parameters to include images and pictures, then you have multi-layerings. You have one thing that could fit into 5 categories, and vice versa. And then it seems to become quite chaotic. In my work, every show that I do is like a survey show of the body of work. So the context that I'm creating is represented in most exhibitions that I have. Now, this piece that you see, there are 2 pieces in that image that you just showed me, and that is the meaning of things, which is on the tables, and then you have representing the work, which is the things on the bed sheets. And the representing the work is a synopsis of all the stuff that I've done in my career. I mean, it has most everything in it, and it's in 64 bed sheets. And I designed it as a kind of a Duchampian box that represents the points of reference in my work that can be represented again and again. And so they're hanging on the wall. They all go into a box which is about 50 centimeters high by about about maybe 1 meter wide. So my whole world can go into a box that can be shipped anywhere in the world. And that was, in a way, the point, was the portability of the whole thing.
Would you explain us your cosmology?
Well, there's 2 cosmologies. One of them I never called a cosmology, but now that seems to be what it is. And that is the 5 worlds. The red is subject. The black is language. The yellow are the arts. The blue is the world unframed, and the green is the elements. So the green is form, physical form, you could say. The blue is the context of the everyday, that's just automatic living. And then the yellow, you see there in the image, you have on the far left, you have a paint palette, a dancer, a film, a photographer, a writing, sculpture, music, and theater. Above that, you have the basic signs in my work, and then some other kinds of signs. And then above that, you have what I call the cosmology, which is heaven and hell, and the landscape that exists in our society, which is not based in reality. It's based in the subject, in the subjective. And this is the part where you have, where was I before I was born? Where do I go after I die? And where is God and heaven and hell and angels and demons and all of that stuff? The subject of the artist and how old the artist is, the race of the artist, the sexuality of the artist, the context of the artist, where in the world are you living? That has become the subject of the artwork. And I'm not interested in that subject. I'm interested in the subject which is more abstract. Why do we keep making art, and how does that change? This is the part that I'm interested in. In my work, I represent heaven and hell, things that are not so seemingly important in contemporary life, but they have to do with faith. And in that sense, every culture in the history of the world, when you get to the beginning of art, it has to do with this subject. Every single one. It doesn't matter where it is. And and yet I am one of the very, very few contemporary artists, international contemporary artists, that is dealing with it. And why is that? Why am I the only one? I am a surrealist. And surrealism.
It's very surprising because I am an art historian, and so as an art historian, I would expect for an artist who calls himself a surrealist, or who thinks or says that he works on the question of cosmogony, God, heaven and hell, etc. I would expect that you would use pictures that have been used by other painters, artists, or humans in general as pictures for cosmology, and that's not the case for you. Finally, you use very, very different images.
Well, the cosmology, when you said that the cosmology, the thing about my representation of it is not of cosmologies that one is recognizing normally. That's important. I did not want to represent Christ in my cosmology. I didn't want to. I represent God, but it's really archetypal that I'm interested in, and having to do with answering the questions of where was I before I was born, and where do I go after I die, and why do things happen the way they do while I live my life? And the cosmology answers those questions. So I wanted to represent God in my work. There's distance on it, and it's a model of a cosmology. It's not a cosmology. Cosmologies are social phenomenons. They are not formal.
How do you choose the images you use for your works? And where do you find them?
An image or a picture may evolve over a period of time, and also the subjects may evolve. So they're not really chosen like choosing pictures out of a book or out of a video or whatever. They can evolve on their own, and you cannot say exactly when they were chosen, if they were chosen. But they come out of like a lot of the images from the cosmology come out of my performances, the performance work, and you might say the trance state. So that's another thing to say, that where do I choose my images comes from a fact that the images are all out there, and that somehow we simply choose them the way we choose subjects on our iPhone, like points, like apps on our, like you go to have an app and I have 25 pictures and I point to one and then I get one, and that's that. But it's, I think the evolvement of the subject is not like that. I think it's much more abstract, and it comes out in a slow, like, as I said, the cosmology has been evolving for 45 years. So it's hard to say exactly when. I know why I did the first one I did, the first time I chose it, but it was having to do with the idea of the cosmology in general, and as it relates to what I thought, trying to understand what is it, and what is art, and how does art work. And my work, a lot of my work, when you see it, it looks like it belongs. It's like I feel that I have been put into a situation where a lot of people think of me as being very creative. You know, like I'm a creative pictures artist, because I don't simply quote the culture directly, that I'm somehow inventing something. So in a way, and I'm inventing my own language. But when I invent my own language, that makes the language less important, not more important for most people, because they want work to be grounded in reality in their world. And my work is obviously not. It's grounded in my subjective reality, and thus I think people think it's less important. I become like the fool on the hill. I've always felt that people see me as being a kind of an enlightened outsider on my own hill, inventing my own language about my own universe. And that I don't have a lot to do with what's happening in the real world, and thus I'm less important. This is how I see it. That's how I see people see me. In a show I had at Peter Freeman's 3 or 4 years ago, I was giving a lecture on the exhibition, and I gave them this point, and they could see everything around them. And I pulled out my iPhone, and I said to them, you know, I'm always considered to be the fool on the hill. And I pulled out my iPhone, and I showed them my home page, which is where all the apps are, all the signs for all the apps. And I showed it to them, and I said, does this look like my exhibition? And it looked exactly like my exhibition. My exhibition looks exactly like the homepage of any given iPhone, with the front part, the back part, the signs, the pictures, the landscapes, all of that. That whole interface has been represented in my work going back 40 years. I started working with signs in mid-70s, early mid-70s, and I'm putting them up on the wall in a very similar way that the iPhone has them on there.
Would you say that nothing has changed for you since the iPhone?
The whole thing about entering the picture and saying that the pictures are the basis of our reality in our brains, because and through our eyes. This is something that I grew up with. You know, I grew up with television, and television was a very simplistic recorded image, but it was enveloping me as I grew up. You know, the whole thing about, say, virtual reality. When I was involved with virtual reality and continue to be involved with the media image, that it's not the picture that's important, it's the feeling of what that picture represents. My last show, one of my shows at the Hangar Bacoco was called The Feeling of Things. And that when you're on the internet, when you are engaged in all of these different worlds, and the key word is engaged, that there is a back and forth, you're engaged within that construction, that you feel a certain way, and it gives you pleasure, and it gives you anxiety. But I'm very much interested in the engagement in that world. My piece called The Meaning of Things, which is the piece on the table, is all images from the internet that have to do with these worlds that I'm talking about.
Yeah, Matt, but there are images from internet, and we're talking about cell phone and internet, but I think in the picture we have seen before in the exhibition at the Max Le Grand Tornu, you also show objects, the deer, I don't know how you call that, the deer antlers?
The antlers,
yeah.
the antlers, yes.
Someone else's collection, from someone else.
It's the body. I mean, we're all talking about, you know, our minds and about the internet, but we're all physical beings. You know, we have bodies. We live in the physical world. That is the MIT project. That's from the late 80s, early 90s. It has to do with making physical these 5 different worlds, and then I was to put objects in those spaces. So it's a way of cataloging objects within an interface, similar to the interface of the iPhone screen, but you're walking around it, you're looking at it. Those antlers are a collection of the director. He collects antlers from his country house, and so I needed to put that into the green area. I wanted something to do with kind of like this this very primal object, and the antlers were perfect for me.
The other day I looked the performance you made at the Pirelli Foundation, and the Max, you had all those different performances together,
right,
in the room, and the performances are opening spaces between pictures and words, between of course a space between art and reality, between consciousness and unconsciousness. So this is, I mean, it seems to me that you're like floating between your different worlds when you under hypnosis. Is that?
Yeah, that's true. The thing about hypnosis is that, you know, my work, my work has to do with cataloging pictures and places and experiences. And the hypnosis is the only place where I cannot do that. I experience it directly. I have no control. I feel that I am continuously surprised. And hypnosis is not one way or another. It's many ways. It's a form of concentration, and the subconscious is a very powerful idea and concept. That we don't know what we're doing all the time, that we are not in control. I think in today's world, with the iPhone, it's all about control, but we are not. We are not, and I think that that these performances are a way for me to puncture the context that I have created. It's a way to get into what I call that person. That person is the person that I become in the trance state. And that person is with me all the time. It's kind of shocking how powerful the medium is in terms of what I experience or what people experience when they do go into this. And I remember I was in this back room before I was to go on stage, and I was going on stage, you know, I had no idea what I was going to do, none. And I come out into the room, and it's a room filled with 300 people. Wow. And it's very brightly lit, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I go out there, and immediately what I do, I feel the humidity of that room and the bright white. So it was a wet white space. And what I started to do, I surprised myself, was to rub my cheek on the wall, like a cat would rub their cheek on a bed. And I was circling my space like an animal. I mean, this is in retrospect. And I was marking my spot, my space, with my notebook. And I did not have a clue what I was going to do or what I was doing. And then slowly, something comes out. And, you know, while in a trance state, I talk about being fake. The trance state is as if you take the meaning out of the object and insert it into the brain without the object. You feel that object and you feel that meaning, but without any context. The context is a mystery. At the Hangar Pecoca, when I came out and I introduced myself to the audience and I said, my name is Matt. Mm-hmm. When I said my name was Matt, I could not help it, but I started to cry. I had no idea why. My whole body was convulsing, and I had no idea why I was crying. And then I said Mullican. And then when saying my name was Mullican, that was easy for me. But Matt was not easy at all. It was a total surprise. And people came up to me after that performance and say, why did you say you were fake all the time? We're really interested in this idea of fakeness. And I could not answer them. I can't. That's the nice thing about the performances with hypnosis, is that I really cannot say exactly what my intentions were because it's really not so available. I really don't know, but it's important to have that in my body of work, to have a place in my body of work where I don't know.
When you talk about your works, you seem to be very aware, very conscious of what you're doing. And would you say that that person that you become, that you are or are supposed to be when you are in a trance
that
state,
person, yes,
is that person present in your plastic works or totally absent?
yes, has to be present there, has to be always there. I think that person is a part of me and is a part of everything I do, but it is within the hypnosis and within the performances under hypnosis and within the videos of the performance under hypnosis, it's distilled out. That person is in the rest of my work. It's just a part of it. It somehow represents the psyche in the abstract, the feeling in the abstract in my body. This is in retrospect, I say this, but while I'm in it, it's another thing.
I still remember the exhibition you made in Grenoble. And that was also something like, I don't know, 20 years ago. And I still remember that exhibition. And it seems to me that you address
30 years ago.
I remember the concrete on that huge space.
Yes,
and I remember these concrete pieces.
The concrete, yeah.
You had, I do not remember exactly everything and what was inside,
Oh,
but
of course.
I said that, I mentioned that because it seems to me that you address your all exhibition you do, you are addressing physically to the visitor. There is something very physical.
Right.
Enter your show.
When you talk about the concrete in the physical space, there is an aspect of my work which is its architecture. It's its physicality and its materials and how we relate to objects in scale. In scale is something that I'm able to deal with because I work with different materials the way I do. And like at the Hangar Bacoca, when you had all those flags above and then these pavilions down below, I filled up the space and you were really inside my world. And as it was in the Grenoble, when you have the flags and the concrete piece in that great hall, they were made for that space. You are correct. They function in that space itself. And the big concrete piece is a map. It's a map like a map of my 5 worlds called 5 into 1, and it weighed 150 tons. 150 tons, and yet it's a map, and maps are weightless. They don't have to have physical form to function. And so this problem of the physical form of the map and the map itself is like the body-mind. It's like the body-mind. For instance, going to the show at the MAC where I had my rubbings on the pedestals as well on the walls. So you're looking down at them and you're walking between them, they're on the floor, and then they're on the walls around you. The whole thing shifts. That whole piece changes when you do that. And we physically feel the pictures, the objects in different ways. And that is like architecture. That's what, I have made so many installations in my life that I'm aware and I have a lot of fun with the installations of how I put these pictures up in a physical space. And a lot of it has to do with scale, because our bodies are of finite size, and we relate to objects and images in relationship, in that relationship, physical size.
It has to do with the architectures, it has to do with the physicality, but at the same time, the piece is extremely light and subtle.
Now that entire piece, all of those pieces were done in Berlin, and they were all done as secondaries, and they're all done on unframed canvas, unstretched canvas. And I did them as a record, as a personal record of all the Berlin pictures. And they're rubbings. you know, they are rubbings, and I made them as a way of contextualizing all of that in one piece. But the problem of the issue of physical space and virtual reality is something that I'm very much interested in. I did this in that piece that you saw in Turquoise. When we built that, the man who built that whole world, the five into one, he had built the bathtub inside the house where we can all go into. And then he started to want to build the sink. He was building the sink inside the space, and he would build the top of the sink, and then it would merge with the bottom and disappear. And he didn't know what was wrong with the computer. Why isn't this holding? What's going on? Everything is fine. And then he realized, after working on this problem for like several hours, that he had become so small in the data that the computer could not differentiate the difference between the top and the bottom of the sink. They were on the same point, the same referent, because scale in the computer does not exist.
Yeah.
The scale of big things to little things is how those things relate to the space between my eyes. Yes. Because it has to do with the 3D effect of the virtual space, because these were 3D glasses. And the issue of, you can get so small inside it or so big. So scale is manipulatable. And that is something that I do in my exhibitions. So scale and context are malleable. And this is something that I think hopefully the internet is becoming more clear. This pandemic is fascinating for that we're in the middle of right now, because the matter of scale is changing, because we're all feeling the same thing at the same time. So we're all in one room right now. We all are in the same, you know, we are isolating, we are involved, we're slowly coming out. But we've all gone through this, we've all become, numbers are changing. The ideas of what numbers represent is changing. You know, that when they want to give us a pill, we're talking about how many billions of pills, vaccination, you know, how long will this take? I mean, the numbers are staggering with this whole thing.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you
Merci.
very much, Matt. Thank you.
Ciao. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.